The Beast Within wasn't merely an early 80 seconds horror entry, it was a cinematic rupture born from disorder, fear, and a script that refused to behave. What began as a modest thriller quickly spiraled into a production marked by broken effects, abandoned ideas, and a transformation sequence that pushed the crew far past exhaustion. Tension simmered beneath every decision as makeup failed, performances blurred into distress, and the story's darkest implications hovered uncomfortably over the set. Why did a film with such limited resources attempt something so brutally ambitious? And why does its creature still unsettle viewers decades later? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The Beast Within. Fact 1. The earliest roots of The Beast Within trace back to a screenplay that carried shadows no one involved wished to acknowledge openly. Although officially marketed as a creature feature, the first drafts drew unsettling inspiration from a real-life assault case that left a lasting mark on the writers. Studio executives demanded multiple rewrites to obscure the connection, hoping audiences would focus on the monstrous transformation rather than the human brutality beneath it. Yet traces of that origin seeped through every revision, giving the film a bleak emotional undercurrent that resisted polishing. Actors remembered receiving new pages each morning, scenes shifting tone abruptly, motivations evolving without warning, and the narrative's moral center dissolving into something ambiguous and troubled. Even the director admitted later that he felt the film was wrestling with a truth it couldn't name, as if the story were built on a foundation too volatile to stabilize. The disjointed script created a discomfort that lingered through every stage of production, shaping performances and atmosphere alike. And while critics chalked the film's unease up to sloppy writing, the deeper reality was more complicated. The movie carried the echo of something painfully real. In trying to distance itself from its origins, the film inadvertently amplified them, leaving a tension on screen that mere fiction could never fully contain. Fact 2. Casting Michael became a challenge that exposed just how psychologically demanding the role truly was. Dozens of actors auditioned, yet most stepped away once they realized the transformation wasn't just physical, it required an emotional unraveling few could convincingly embody. The script demanded moments of fragility punctured by sudden violence, shifts in expression that suggested a consciousness splitting apart. When Paul Clemens arrived, he didn't give a clean performance. Instead, he delivered something jagged and unsettled, as though he were already wrestling with an unseen presence. The casting team hesitated, concerned about entrusting such a volatile role to someone still early in his career, especially given the grueling prosthetic work ahead. Clemens later revealed that he underestimated the toll the role would take, especially the hours spent under layers of latex that tightened as if trying to infiltrate his skin. Crew members recalled him pacing in isolation, stretching his face and jaw as though resisting an internal force. That restless intensity translated onto the screen, giving Michael a haunted quality that elevated the film beyond its budgetary limits. Ironically, the very vulnerability producers feared might break him became the defining strength of his performance. Fact 3. The film's infamous transformation scene emerged from a production process so chaotic that it nearly brought filming to a halt. While other horror films of the era relied on advanced animatronics and cutting-edge prosthetics, The Beast Within operated with limited resources, forcing the effects team to rely on experimental techniques that frequently malfunctioned. Early makeup tests failed dramatically, with prosthetics tearing apart or swelling uncontrollably under the studio lights. Mechanical bladders meant to simulate expanding muscles burst at unpredictable intervals, spraying adhesive across equipment and ruining takes. The actor endured long sessions inside cumbersome rigs that tightened uncomfortably, raising concerns about safety as much as performance. The crew worked through exhaustion, reshaping molds, improvising tubing systems, and adjusting angles to disguise technical flaws. When the sequence was finally assembled in the editing room, what should have been discarded mistakes instead formed a grotesque coherence that felt disturbingly organic. Audiences assumed the uneven pulsations and distorted facial contortions were intentional, reading artistry into what was often barely controlled collapse. The transformation's power lies in that unpredictability. It looks less like horror designed by professionals and more like nature corrupting a human body in real time. What the filmmakers feared was failure became the film's most unforgettable achievement. Fact 4. The struggle to secure workable filming locations became one of the production's most relentless burdens, shaping the movie in ways no one anticipated. The crew expected the rural landscape to offer quiet, atmospheric backdrops, but instead they faced unpredictable storms, eroding soil, and structures deteriorating faster than they could reinforce them. Days were spent hauling equipment through mud thick enough to trap trucks, and nights were interrupted by humidity so intense it warped lighting gels and caused lenses to fog repeatedly. The abandoned mill, a pivotal setting, presented its own hazards as floorboards sagged beneath the weight of camera rigs, forcing last-minute redesigns of entire sequences. Even local wildlife made its presence known, swarming sets with an uncanny precision that unsettled cast and crew alike. Conversations about relocating surfaced more than once, yet the studio insisted the environment's decaying textures lent authenticity impossible to replicate on controlled stages. Despite exhaustion and safety concerns, the team pushed forward, improvising supports, reworking schedules, and reshaping their vision around the land's unpredictable temperament. What audiences eventually saw as atmospheric tension was born from survival, not design. The landscape did not merely host the film, it authored a portion of its mood. The irony is that the very conditions threatening the production became the elements viewers praised as haunting realism. Fact 5. Behind the scenes, a quiet collision of creative impulses unfolded between director Philippe Mora and the studio, each driven by conflicting visions of what The Beast Within should become. Mora aimed for a somber, psychological descent, treating the narrative as a tragedy rooted in inherited violence, while executives pushed for sharper shocks, clearer exposition, and more commercial brutality. Script notes arrived with increasing frequency, demanding additional gore or simplified motivations, reshaping scenes that Mora had intended as subtle character studies. Crew members recounted observing tense, whispered arguments near the trailers, the director defending ambiguity, while executives insisted audiences required explicit explanations. The cast felt the strain as well, receiving contradictory direction depending on who oversaw the set on a given day, leaving performances that drifted between introspective drama and heightened genre theatrics. Editors later inherited this tonal patchwork, struggling to reconcile footage that seemed to originate from different films entirely. Yet in this tension lay an unexpected advantage, a fractured, dreamlike rhythm that later viewers interpreted as intentional stylistic risk. The film's mismatched tones, once criticized as unfocused, eventually formed the backbone of its cult identity. Ironically, the tug-of-war that threatened cohesion became the very reason the movie felt so singular. Fact 6. Designing the creature was a process defined not by a unified artistic direction, but by ongoing debates about what the monster should communicate. Some envisioned a figure rooted in folklore, evoking curses passed through generations. Others hoped for a scientifically framed mutation suggesting contaminated lineage. These divergent philosophies manifested in conflicting prototypes, elongated jaws hinting at predatory ancestry, translucent skin suggesting something embryonic, and skeletal distortions reflecting internal fracture more than evolution. The workshop became a battleground of ideas as adhesives bubbled under extreme humidity, mechanical components malfunctioned, and sculpted features collapsed during tests under theatrical lighting. Each failure forced the team to reconsider whether the creature was meant to inspire fear, pity, or both simultaneously. In many sessions, the actor strained under the weight of appliances that restricted breathing or movement, prompting hurried redesigns to prevent injury. Eventually, the final form emerged not through consensus but through attrition. What survived repeated collapse became the creature's defining silhouette. Critics later debated the monster's awkward proportions, calling them either bold choices or technical missteps, depending on interpretation. Yet the truth is more complex. The creature's unsettling appearance reflects a process as unstable as the narrative itself. Its imperfections are its essence, not its flaw. Fact 7. The soundscape of The Beast Within developed into an ordeal that revealed just how fragile the boundary is between technical craft and psychological disturbance. Early attempts to build the creature's vocal presence failed spectacularly, producing growls too animalistic or shrieks too synthetic. Nothing conveyed the sense of a human consciousness dissolving under violent evolution. The crew experimented with metallic friction, slowed down screeches, and manipulated animal roars, yet every blend felt artificial, as though the monster were merely performing rather than suffering. Eventually, the designers turned to human voices, pushing volunteers into excruciating vocal contortions, coaxing out strained breaths and guttural resonance that left throats raw. Microphones captured vibrations that wavered unpredictably, trembling with a sense of despair more than rage. When these recordings were layered with nearly inaudible insect-like frequencies, the mixture became disturbingly alive. Editors reviewing the audio described feeling unsettled before they understood why. The sound resembled neither beast nor man, but something trapped in transition. What made the effect so terrifying wasn't its loudness, but its intimacy, as though the creature's anguish reached beyond the screen. Ironically, the most haunting sonic moment came not from innovation, but from human voices pushed to the brink of fracture. Fact 8. As filming concluded, the enormous burden of reshaping the movie fell on the editors, who inherited hours of footage that rarely aligned in tone, structure, or intention. Scenes designed as brooding character studies clashed sharply with moments driven by shock and spectacle, creating jarring shifts that resisted seamless assembly. Continuity poses became daily hurdles as lighting inconsistencies, shifting performances, and reshoots layered multiple emotional trajectories onto single sequences. The editors described the process as piecing together a dream. Images felt connected but not logically tethered, creating a fluid, unsettling rhythm. They salvaged emotional beats from fragmented takes, crafted transitions from mismatched angles, and used sound to smooth over disruptions the camera could not hide. Over time, the movie adopted a hypnotic cadence, shaped as much by necessity as by artistry. What emerged was neither the director's original vision nor the studio's desired product, but a hybrid that carried the fingerprints of every conflict embedded in the footage. Critics later labeled the film disorienting, unsure whether its structural wavering was intentional. Yet, this very instability, the sense that the narrative continually slips out of alignment, granted the movie an uncanny allure. The editing room didn't just shape the beast within, it revealed the fractured soul the production could never fully control. Fact 9. When it came time to market The Beast Within, the studio found itself grappling with a film that resisted easy categorization. Posters leaned heavily into grotesque imagery, emphasizing teeth, skin rupture, and primal rage, even though these elements represented only fragments of the narrative's emotional weight. Trailers stitched together shocks without context, presenting the film as a straightforward monster spectacle rather than the uneasy blend of folklore, tragedy, and bodily mutation it truly was. Test audiences reacted with confusion, expecting either a sympathetic coming-of-age horror or a relentless creature rampage, yet the film sat somewhere between, refusing to satisfy the expectations of either group. Internally, marketers debated whether highlighting the transformation would draw fans or alienate them. Publicity teams attempted multiple taglines, none accurately capturing the film's unstable heart. Ultimately, the campaign settled for ambiguity, leaning on fear rather than thematic clarity. Ironically, the mismatch between advertisement and experience pushed viewers to discuss the film more fervently, trying to articulate what made it feel so different from its promotional materials. The gulf between the marketed monster and the film's deeper anxieties became part of its mythology. The movie's identity wasn't shaped by what the marketing promised, but by what it couldn't describe. Fact 10. The longer the production remained in the abandoned mill, the more the cast and crew became convinced that something about the location resisted being filmed. What began as minor inconveniences, lights dimming without provocation, equipment shutting down despite full batteries, soon escalated into patterns that felt far too deliberate to ignore. Electricians triple-checked wiring yet found no explanations. The sound team replayed atmospheric recordings, only to hear faint murmurs layered beneath the ambient noise, as though the building were exhaling in slow intervals. Even seasoned technicians admitted privately that they avoided certain corners of the structure, claiming the air shifted temperature unexpectedly, carrying a strange metallic scent. The director attempted to maintain a grounded perspective, insisting exhaustion was creating illusions, but privately he confessed the mill's silence unnerved him more than any staged horror. Local residents had warned the crew that the building carried a history steeped in misfortune, fires, disappearances, and superstition that clung to the property long after its purpose had been abandoned. Whether or not the filmmakers believed the stories, tension seeped into every gesture and performance, giving the actors a frantic edge that could never have been directed. Scenes meant to convey unease gained an unintended realism, shaped by the environment's oppressive stillness rather than scripted intention. In the final cut, critics praised the film's atmospheric dread, noting how the setting seemed to breathe around the characters. What they didn't realize was that much of that tension wasn't crafted, it was simply captured. Fact 11. As shooting progressed, the psychological wear of the film's themes began to accumulate, affecting actors in ways the production hadn't anticipated. The narrative required sustained intensity, forcing performers to inhabit mental states defined by fear, confusion, and bodily betrayal. Days often began with hours-long makeup sessions that left faces constricted beneath tightening prosthetics, creating a sensation of being slowly sealed inside an unfamiliar skin. Cast members described entering scenes already burdened by a heaviness that came not from acting but from the claustrophobia of the materials fused to their bodies. Paul Clemens, who carried the emotional core of the film, found himself drifting into character between takes, muttering lines under his breath as though negotiating with something inside him. Other actors reported vivid dreams of distorted reflections, unrecognizable versions of themselves contorting in mirrors. Attempts to lighten the atmosphere, music, jokes, brief breaks rarely succeeded. The intensity of the story seeped into conversations, coloring the set with an unspoken anxiety. Crew members not appearing on screen began to feel it too, noting that tension lingered even after they returned home, as if the film's internal logic had followed them beyond the shooting day. Critics later remarked on the remarkable vulnerability of the performances, unaware that the authenticity was not purely artistic craft, but the cumulative effect of psychological fatigue. The line between character and performer blurred not by design, but by immersion. Fact 12. The special effects department found itself at the center of a philosophical dispute that went far beyond materials and technique. The question they wrestled with was deceptively simple. Should the creature evoke empathy or terror? Some argued that Michael's transformation should leave traces of the boy he once was, preserving expressive qualities, eyes that flickered with awareness, trembling movements that suggested resistance. Others pushed for a design that abandoned humanity altogether, favoring exaggerated bone structures, distended tissue, and rupturing musculature that emphasized monstrous inevitability. These opposing visions produced prototype after prototype, each reflecting a different ideological stance. Some collapsed under heat, others cracked under adhesive, a few looked promising until tested under harsh lighting, where every flaw surfaced with brutal clarity. The debates wore down the team's morale, leaving sculptors, painters, and mechanical technicians exhausted by the constant revisions. Still, their persistence shaped an unexpected resolution, a creature that appeared neither wholly human nor fully beast, suspended in a liminal space where identity erodes before the viewer's eyes. Audiences later struggled to categorize the monster, noting that its form inspired both fear and reluctant sympathy. The ambiguity became one of the film's most distinctive qualities, not because it was planned, but because compromise had been the only path forward. The creature reflected the production itself, fractured, conflicted, and strangely compelling. Fact 13. The creature's signature vocalization, the agonizing sound that defines the beast within, was not the result of cutting-edge audio design, but of a process so raw and unsettling that some crew members refused to participate. Early efforts to craft the perfect transformation's scream faltered when animal recordings felt too familiar and mechanical distortions sounded hollow. The filmmakers needed something that conveyed a consciousness unraveling from the inside, a voice caught between human anguish and involuntary mutation. The sound team turned to experimental techniques, recording volunteers as they forced air through constricted throats, dragging breaths across tense vocal cords, and shaping vowels in unnatural patterns. Technicians manipulated these sessions with frequency shifts so slight they barely registered. Yet they created a trembling resonance that unsettled listeners immediately. The layering of desperate human sounds with subtle environmental rumble produced an eerie timbre that made even seasoned editors recoil. Some insisted the noise felt intrusive, as though it reached into the listener's chest rather than their ears. When combined with the footage, the effect grew almost too intimate, blurring the line between performative suffering and something disturbingly authentic. The production debated whether the audio should be softened, worrying it would overwhelm viewers, but the director insisted on keeping its full intensity. Ironically, the film's most inhuman sound emerged from the most vulnerable corners of the human voice, capturing a fear no mechanical device could replicate. Fact 14. The wardrobe department, often overlooked in horror filmmaking, found itself pushed to extreme limits as the production demanded costumes capable of surviving violent physical transformation. Garments designed for early scenes shredded unpredictably when paired with prosthetics that expanded, contracted, or tore under the heat of studio lights. Shirts intended to rip only at specific seams split elsewhere, forcing the team into constant improvisation. Sweat, adhesive residue, and swelling appliances warped fabric, altering fit and texture with each take. To maintain continuity, the wardrobe crew created multiple versions of every major costume, each calibrated to a different phase of Michael's metamorphosis, but rapid shooting schedules and uncooperative weather made consistency a daily struggle. They stitched, reinforced, and patched garments between takes, often moments before the camera rolled. Actors recalled feeling the strain on their bodies as clothes clung too tightly in some scenes and hung loosely in others, echoing the instability of their characters. The gradual erosion of Michael's wardrobe became a visual metaphor for his dissolving identity, even though it emerged largely from necessity rather than artistic design. Critics later praised the authenticity of the film's visual decay, but the truth is simpler. The wardrobe department was fighting a losing battle against physics, materials, and time. And in losing that battle, they gave the film one of its most haunting textures. Fact 15. Capturing the emotional climax of The Beast Within required the cinematography team to navigate a demanding intersection of physical chaos and psychological collapse. The director envisioned a sequence that communicated internal disintegration through camera movement, shadow, and claustrophobic framing. Yet the equipment available on set was far from ideal. Dolly tracks warped on uneven floors, lenses fogged under relentless humidity, and lighting rigs flickered whenever moisture interfered with their wiring. Still, the crew pushed forward, using handheld shots to mimic mental destabilization and fractured reflections to distort the boundaries of Michael's identity. Actors performed under these unpredictable conditions with remarkable vulnerability, often delivering their strongest moments during takes where technical failure seemed imminent. In one unplanned instance, a lens flare wrapped itself around an expression of anguish so precisely that the director insisted it remain in the final cut. The blend of intention and accident gave the climax a jagged emotional rhythm that more polished productions might have lost. Instead of relying on flawless technique, the film captured something raw, an unraveling that felt immediate and unfiltered. Viewers later described the scene as overwhelming, unsure whether its intensity came from craft or chaos. The truth lies somewhere between. The production's limitations didn't hinder the climax, they shaped it. Fact 16. When The Beast Within was submitted to rating boards, the film encountered a wave of apprehension far beyond what the producers expected. What unsettled censors wasn't solely the graphic violence or bodily distortion, but the narrative's underlying suggestion that monstrosity could be inherited through an act of brutality. Several boards argued that the film's premise blurred moral lines in ways that felt dangerously ambiguous, presenting a transformation not rooted in mythology, but in an all-too-human crime. Attempts to soften the imagery proved futile. Frames trimmed for gore still carried an emotional violence that regulators deemed excessive. Spending weeks negotiating cuts, the filmmakers found themselves caught between preserving the story's psychological impact and meeting the threshold for wide release. Some territories demanded such extensive edits that the film nearly lost narrative coherence. Others refused classification entirely, citing the emotional harm the transformation sequence might inflict. Ironically, these restrictions amplified the film's reputation, drawing attention to a horror that audiences assumed must be truly transgressive to provoke such strong reactions. Instead of diminishing the film's reach, the controversy gave it a mythic aura, positioning it as a work too unsettling for conventional boundaries. In trying to constrain the film, censors inadvertently expanded its legacy. Fact 17. Test screenings revealed a tension that mirrored the production's internal struggle. Viewers simply could not agree on what The Beast Within was trying to be. Some saw a tragic story about a young man doomed by forces beyond his control, empathizing with Michael's disintegration as though witnessing a cursed coming-of-age tale. Others laughed nervously during scenes of intense transformation, interpreting the raw, practical effects as exaggerated rather than horrifying. The tonal shifts, born from creative clashes behind the scenes, left audiences oscillating between fear, confusion, and uneasy fascination. Studio executives panicked, believing the film's inability to settle into a single emotional register would alienate mainstream viewers. The director, however, defended the ambiguity, arguing that the instability reflected Michael's fractured psyche. Over time, those who revisited the film discovered layers obscured during the initial release, subtle performances, thematic contradictions, and a pervasive sense of dread that evolved upon reflection. What once seemed like inconsistency became a deliberate-seeming texture, a cinematic echo of a mind unraveling. The film's refusal to conform ultimately attracted viewers who valued strangeness over clarity. Audience division, which executives feared, became the fuel for the film's growing cult identity. Fact 18. After a modest theatrical run, The Beast Within found a second life in the era of video rentals, where horror fans often selected films based on box art rather than reviews. The movie's cover, featuring a contorted face suspended between humanity and monstrosity, captured attention immediately, promising a type of visceral horror that mainstream titles avoided. Those who rented it expecting conventional structure encountered a narrative far more unstable: part Southern Gothic, part biological nightmare, part psychological tragedy. Discussions about the film spread through local rental shops, fanzines, and late-night genre programs, where devotees praised its unpredictability and unapologetically raw effects. Some viewers argued that its imperfections were precisely what made it memorable, distinguishing it from slicker contemporaries whose polish dulled their emotional impact. Others appreciated its strange sincerity, the sense that the filmmakers pursued an unnerving vision even when resources fell short. Over time, the film became a rite of passage for horror enthusiasts, seeking works that defied categorization. The same qualities that bewildered audiences during its release became the reasons it endured. The Beast Within didn't merely survive the video era, it was reborn through it. Fact 19. The transformation sequence in The Beast Within has continued to command fascination not because of flawless technique, but because of how profoundly it unsettles even the most seasoned horror viewers. Unlike the smooth precision of its genre contemporaries, the scene unfolds with uneven rhythms, distorted textures, and uncontrolled distortions that feel alarmingly spontaneous. Scholars note that the effect resembles a body rebelling against itself, contorting not for spectacle, but in defiance of a fate imposed upon it. These analog imperfections, visible seams, unpredictable swelling, trembling prosthetics, contribute to an authenticity digital effects could never imitate. Crew members recalled how the rig malfunctioned repeatedly, producing movements that were never planned, yet appeared disturbingly lifelike when captured on film. The performance beneath those failing mechanisms added another layer of unease. The actors' strained expressions and forced breath created the impression of a consciousness dissolving moment by moment. Viewers initially criticized the scene's lack of refinement, but over time, its rawness grew into a defining trait, elevating it from technical mishap to psychological spectacle. What feels terrifying is not the creature's final form, but the process of becoming messy, involuntary, and violently intimate. Ironically, the sequence that faltered the most during production became the one that carved its place in horror history. Fact 20. Within the horror canon, The Beast Within occupies a liminal position admired yet rarely placed beside the more polished classics of its era. Its reputation often hinges on comparisons to landmark transformation films, inviting scrutiny that highlights its modest resources and unconventional structure. Yet what distinguishes it is not technical mastery, but thematic audacity. Instead of offering a neatly defined monster with clear mythology, the film presents a creature born of trauma, folklore, and biology, its origins deliberately obscured. This ambiguity denies viewers the comfort of categorization, leaving them suspended between tragedy and terror. Critics who revisited the film years later found themselves re-evaluating its fragmented nature, interpreting its tonal instability as a reflection of a world unraveling around Michael. The creature's motives remain elusive, its existence shaped less by external forces than by inherited violence and emotional decay. That lack of narrative certainty challenges audiences to form their own interpretations, ensuring the story remains open to debate long after the credits roll. Over time, the film evolved from an overlooked curiosity into a touchstone for those who champion unconventional horror. Its legacy is defined not by clarity, but by the questions it refuses to answer, a reminder that some monsters linger because they cannot be fully understood. Bonus fact: Long after The Beast Within faded from theaters, whispers began circulating about a lost sequence filmed during the production's final, most chaotic stretch footage, so disturbing that it was removed before editors could assemble a rough cut. Crew accounts differ in detail, but most describe a moment meant to depict Michael suspended in a half-formed state, caught between collapsing humanity and an emergence that refused to resolve. The prosthetics created for this incomplete metamorphosis were experimental, layered with translucent gels and embedded tubing designed to mimic veins that throbbed irregularly under pulsed lighting. Several technicians later admitted they felt uneasy watching the effect in person. The skin seemed to ripple independently of the actor's movements, as though responding to some rhythm only it could sense. When the footage was screened privately, the room fell silent. Unlike the final transformation, which still carried traces of theatricality, this abandoned version felt oppressively real. The incomplete form twitched with a helplessness that bordered on the tragic, its movements fragile rather than monstrous, suggesting a body caught in its own rebellion. Editors argued that the scene risked overwhelming the film's emotional trajectory, shifting it from horror to something far more psychologically destabilizing. Others believed audiences would mistake the unrefined effect for a technical failure, unaware of how intentionally uncomfortable the footage had become. The director eventually ordered the sequence removed, though no one can confirm whether the reels were destroyed or quietly stored away. Over the years, rumors have grown that a few frames survived, locked in private archives or forgotten storage rooms. Whether true or not, the possibility has fueled endless speculation. Some fans argue that the unseen scene represents the film's purest expression, the moment where transformation becomes tragedy rather than terror. What lingers is not the image itself, but the idea of it, a fragment too unsettling for the world to witness. Tell us which detail from this story stayed with you, and whether you see The Beast Within as a flawed experiment reaching for something profound, or a horror film whose rawness is its greatest strength. Every perspective adds a new layer to a movie built on ambiguity, and we want to know how you interpret its unsettling legacy. If there is another forgotten film, hidden controversy, or misunderstood performance you want us to explore next, let us know in the comments. Until then, thank you for watching, and keep questioning what lies behind the images we think we understand.